Hello, my name's Colin Riddington, commonly known as Isle of Dogs on many online forums, and this is the first in a series of hints and tips under the title Using Access with Isle of Dogs. Today's video is actually about dealing with the issues caused by apostrophes in data in Access tables, how we fix that, or if you prefer, escape those problems. Now, I've got a database that I actually prepared earlier, which has got a customer table of about 26,000 records. And amongst those records we've got various different records which include apostrophes, for example, in the last name, such as O'Haggerty there. In order to actually work with this, I've actually created a query to filter for those, and I've filtered for anything which includes an apostrophe anywhere in the last name here. And if I run that query, we can see that we've got exactly 217 records there, which start with a field there, this fairly unpronounceable name Di, and so on. And amongst those we've got a fairly interesting Old English and Old French name called Diath, not death but Diath, and it comes under many different spellings. There's 4 different records with that name there. Now what I'm going to try and do now is update one of those records there, and it's one where the customer who's got a surname Diath, spelled D''E and then an E at the end there, has told us that they've actually got the apostrophe in the wrong place, and we should have put it after the second letter, not after the first. So I'm going to run that query now and see whether it actually is a problem. Access is about to update one row, which sounds like it's going to work. It has worked, no errors occurred there, and if we go back to this table and refresh it, you will see now that we've actually managed to change that so it's the same as the other one there. Right, no problem, that worked perfectly well. Let us try a different one. Amongst these 26,000 records we've got over 400 different companies. There are some customers without a company name attached to their record, but we've got various different companies, about 140 records at the most with different ones there. And I'm going to try and update one of those now so it includes an apostrophe in the name there. There's a company called Meavy, and if we go back to here, there are 134 records called Meavy, and if I now try and update that, I'm going to update it to a company with a rather unfortunate sounding name, On Your Bike, with an apostrophe after the on, and bike spelled wrongly with a Y. So if we run that now, it's updating 134 rows, and if we go back to here, and if we now refresh, you can see it's updated successfully. So in other words, apostrophes aren't a problem running Access queries. The problem actually comes when you run code. So I'm going to try and update Minty to Minty Fresh. Run that. No problem. But of course there was no apostrophe in that. Let's now just put that back a second. So I want to use the name Minty in the next version. Run that again. And I'll put it back to where it was before. Okay, we've got a company now with a trading name Minty. And that's fine. Now let's look at the second one. Here we've got an issue where I want to actually now rename that to a name that includes an apostrophe. So Minty has now decided to rename itself as O'Neill and Company. Apostrophe in the middle there. Now you can probably see what the problem is, that because of it's a text string, in SQL queries here we have to surround it with single quotes here, but we've got a single quote in the middle. So what happens when we try and run that? We get an error. Error 3075, not very clear, syntax error in query expression, blah 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 blah. Doesn't actually tell us where it is. We could debug it, but that actually doesn't really help necessarily either. Let's stop that. Now the problem is that we actually need to deal with that single quote there. And there are various ways of dealing with that, but one way is to actually replace that single quote with two single quotes. So instead of saying O'Neill with a single quote there, we said put two apostrophes there. Now let's try and run it now. Do we really want two single apostrophes in there? Well, let's see what happens. It ran, it didn't actually error, and when we press F5 to refresh it, we notice there's only one single quote there. Right. The second one was used to escape the apostrophe, escape the special character. Now that's fine, but it's a bit messy. I have to say, I find that sort of expression there difficult to write accurately. I find it confusing, and I find it easier if we use variables, and there's various reasons for that. So in this second version here, I'm going to take a different company. The company is called Wikis. There are 129 of them, and Wikis has related its name to wicked with an apostrophe in it. So variables here: string old, string new, old name, new name. I've got a variable here, string SQL, and I'm going to use that now to actually try and update this. I'm going to start with this one here. And in this case, because it's a variable, I now have to actually use this sort of expression. Single quote, because it's a string, okay, double quote here, and string new, and double quote, single quote, and the end of the line there. I've done the same with the old expression there. In fact, there's actually only one apostrophe, but it's in the new one here. Let's see what happens. You can probably guess. We're going to get error 3075. Now, let's now do something similar to what we did before, but I'm going to do it by using a function, the replace function. What I'm going to do this time is I'm going to replace all instances of single quotes in any of the string new fields with two single quotes. I'm going to do exactly the same, although it's not relevant here, just to generalize it, with the old name. Replace all instances of string old where there are single quotes with two single quotes. And if we run that now, and I'll turn on the Debug.SQL here, which I should have done before, it runs. It looks like it's putting two single quotes in there, but when we actually look at the company record count data, it's worked perfectly, as you would expect from the previous example. Give me one more example of this, and this is the version I actually prefer. In this case, we put the variables in the procedure header. So update company name, old string, new string. Define string SQL. Exactly the same expression as before, so therefore we know it's going to work because we've already done this. I'll put the debug line in there as before. And to run that then, I've got a separate procedure where I'm going to update the company name Quats to Dell Auto. Okay, Quats is the top there, 141 records. Let's do that now then. Shows you the SQL expression here. Refresh. And it's down there now. Okay, and you can see it's worked, of course. Now let's do a slightly more complicated version of that. This is why I like using this sort of method, because I can very quickly change one expression to another one. So this time I'm going to change all the instances of Dell Auto to a more complicated version. Van Hoff, O'Sharkey and Dorsey. Great company name that. Easy to get the spelling wrong, won't it be? Okay, so let's run that. Refresh, and as you can see it's worked. Now, having changed that, they then got lots of complaints, and therefore they decided that that wasn't a good idea, and they were going to go back to where they started. And believe me, companies do make stupid decisions like this. So they're going to go back to Quats. Still a bad name, but at least it's easy to actually remember. So let's run that and refresh, and we're back to where we started. Now that sort of code we can use also in record sets. I'm not going to show you that in this particular case, but I have covered that in my PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to come back to that now. Do a quick summary. If we haven't got an apostrophe, a simple VBA statement like that will work perfectly successfully. Wrapping the string in single quotes on each case, the new value, the old value. But it fails with error 3075 where we've got an apostrophe. O'Neill and Company was the example I used. To get around that then, we can use various methods. But one way I've shown you earlier is where we actually go on to using variables. Without an apostrophe in the name, it's perfectly right to just do that sort of expression there. But as soon as we put an apostrophe in, we need to actually replace the value where we have got an issue by showing you replace function there, string new, replace all instances where there are single quotes in the record with 2 single quotes. And for completeness, I've done it in both the old and the new values because, of course, as I showed you in one of the examples earlier, that could be the case in either of those records there, those fields there. But a better approach is to put the variables in the procedure header. And as I showed you earlier then, okay, we can just very rapidly make changes here. Same expression as before, okay, debug line's optional, but it helps to actually understand what's going on. Now I mentioned record sets earlier. If we've got a record set, we might want to actually transfer values from a list box into a table, or to update the values from the list box into a table there, and that's fine if we've got no apostrophes, but if we have got apostrophes, we do exactly the same sort of replacement as before. That will work in the same way as I showed you earlier, and that's just about all I want to tell you today. But I'd like to thank you for watching my first video in this new series, and if you found it useful, please could you do the following. First of all, add a like to the video and leave a comment saying what you thought. Even more useful, suggest some topics for future videos in this series. I'll respond to ones that I actually think would be interesting to do. Furthermore, please subscribe. If you subscribe, you'll be notified whenever new videos are uploaded, and I hope to do that at least one a week from now on. Thank you for watching. See you again.